Hi everyone, it's Laura here, and today I'm going to share with you 5 different cards that I created with papers from the Crazy Summer collection by ModaScrap. As always, if you do enjoy this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment in the comment section down below. This helps me knowing that you enjoyed the content and helps the content being suggested to other crafters out there. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. And now let's get started with the tutorial. Before starting the tutorial, I wanted to show you the products that I used today. This is the collection that I used, and as I said, it's called Crazy Summer. It is available both as a 6x6 and a 12x12 inches paper pad, and for my cards today I used the 6x6 format. I also used the dashing rectangles, the dashing squares, and the dashing circles dies to create my designs. For my sentiments, I used the XOXO stamp set by ModaScrap. And lastly, I used WOODSTOCK white cardstock, also by ModaScrap. All the products that I used will be listed and linked in the description box down below, where you will also find a link to the blog post that I created for these projects. The first step coming to the tutorial was to go through my papers and starting to separate them in groups. I have a group for solid backgrounds, I have one where I have repeated patterns type of designs, and then I also set aside one of the papers in this collection to create my focal points. I will be cutting out the images in this pattern paper sheet that, as I said, I set aside for my focal points, and this way basically I don't need to do any coloring for these cards, which makes them really perfect in case you do not enjoy coloring or for some last minute card making, because these are really quick and really easy to make. So the next step was to cut out all the images in this sheet. As you can see, I first separated them all because it's a little bit easier to cut them out this way, and I have to say that the shapes are fairly simple to cut out, they're not too intricate, so this didn't take too long at all. Once the images were all cut out, I started arranging them and trying to find a way to group them to create 5 different focal points for my 5 different cards. So you can see that I'm basically doing some prep work so that once I go ahead and start actually assembling the cards, I have all the elements together and the process is kind of streamlined and not chaotic. It was the first time for me trying this kind of approach for making multiple cards, and I have to say that everything felt much faster and much easier to manage, so I recommend you give it a try. Once I was happy with my 5 focal points, I put them on the side of my desk, keeping them separated from each other, and then I also decided to sketch 5 different card sketches. This was also the point at which I started thinking about what kind of papers I wanted to use for each design, and more or less how to place sentiments and which clusters to use. Obviously, this was meant as a guideline for me, and in the end I will end up changing some aspects of these sketches, so keep in mind that this is supposed to be just a guide and not something that necessarily has to bind you to the sketches you had created in the first place. If you are interested, there is also a file with the 5 different sketches that I created for today's cards, which you can use as inspiration, and you will find it in the blog post that is linked in the description box down below. Since I created card sketches, I knew already how many portrait type of cards I had and how many landscape cards I had, so I could go ahead and create my card bases. For the landscape orientation, I have some white cardstock cut to 5.5 by 8.5 inches and scored at 4.25 inches. And then for my portrait orientation, I have cardstock cut to 11 by 4.25 inches and scored at 5.5 inches, so that all my cards are top folding. The next and last prepping step I did was to cut some WOODSTOCK white cardstock by ModaScrap to 5.5 by 4.25 inches, and I created 5 different panels, one for each card. I could then go ahead, select a few different patterned papers and start creating my first card for today. For the background of my card, I decided to use this lovely watercolor type background with these soft warm tones, and I started by trimming the pattern paper sheet to 4¼ by 5½ inches. Every time I cut a 6×6 inches paper pad to the size of my card front, in this video I'm going to first trim the 4¼ inches and then the 5½ inches, because this gives me strips of cardstock which are left over that are a good size to be used in other cards. I also die cut some woodstock white cardstock with the dashing rectangles dies to a size that is slightly smaller than my card base, and in order to save some pattern paper I took a rectangle die that was a little bit smaller than the one that I used for my white cardstock. I secured it to the center of my background and then I ran it through my die cutting machine to cut out the center. This way I am left with a rectangle cut out that I can use for other cards in this video. I am basically making the most out of this pattern paper pad, and also once we adhere the white panel on this rectangle frame, nobody really can tell that the center was cut out. And although this is not something that I always do when I work with pattern paper, I thought it was especially useful today that I was creating multiple cards with one pattern paper pad only. I then use yet another rectangle die, one size smaller than the woodstock white cardstock panel, to create this strip out of this gorgeous pattern paper with these watercolor tropical leaves, and I also cut one circle out of that red striped pattern paper. I adhered both the strip and the circle to my card front, but at this point I am not going to glue down the focal point yet. I did go over all the ones that I had prepared and I picked one which I sort of just lay on top of my card, and then I put this aside while I started working on the second one. The reason why I decided to do that is that I wanted to have the option to change my mind later on once all the card bases were done and I had a more complete overview of all the projects. For my second card, I picked this beautiful watercolor type background and I trimmed it down to 4¼ by 5½ inches. I'm going to cut a square out of the central part of that panel, and I'm also going to die cut some more woodstock white cardstock to a size that is slightly smaller than the card base. I adhered the white panel to the background using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive so that I have a little bit of time to move things in place while the glue is still wet, and then at this point I realized that my square was a little bit too large for my design, so I ran it through my die cutting machine with a smaller square die, and then I adhered that square on my card front. For some extra interest, I adhered it with the corners pointing upwards. I then selected some images for my focal point and I put everything aside. For my third card today, I chose this galaxy background type of paper from the Crazy Summer collection. I cut it to 4¼ by 5½ inches, and you know the drill by now. I trimmed a rectangle on the inside that was a little bit smaller than the white cardstock panel that I'll be using for the card. You may also remember this orange pattern paper. The rectangle that you see on screen was actually the one that I cut out of the background for my first card. So you can see I am actually reusing these inner cutout rectangles. I'm going to use the dashing circles dies to create kind of a portion of a circle that I'm then going to adhere to my design. I'm also going to pick out some images for my focal point, and then I decided that I wanted to add a couple of strips of pattern paper to take this design up a notch. One is the same pattern paper that I have on the background, whereas I decided to use a red pattern paper for the thinner strip. This way I created a little bit of contrast in my design, and also the pink in the red and pink pattern paper is going to tie in nicely with the red that I have in the popsicle, which is part of the focal point of the card. I adhered everything again using my Nuvo Deluxe adhesive, and as always I put this aside without gluing down the focal points yet. For the base of my fourth card, I used the striped pattern paper and I cut it to 4¼ by 5½ inches so that the stripes would be horizontal on my landscape style card. As always, I trimmed out some paper from the center and then I used the inner cutout rectangle from card number 3 to create another layer for this card. As you can see on the top portion of the screen, I also have a cutout circle that I cut using the dashing circles dies from this pattern paper with the tropical leaves, and I'm going to adhere it to the center but slightly shifted towards the left on my card front. I selected which images I wanted to go with this design, I set this aside and then I started working on the base for my fifth and final card for today. Also in this case, I started by trimming down the background to 4¼ by 5½ inches, and here I wanted to show you why I cut first the 4¼ inches side and then the 5½ inches side, because then I am left with these two strips which are very convenient to create elements on the cards or sentiment banners. I die cut the pattern paper with the popsicles using another die from the dashing rectangle set and I adhered it to my card background, and then I started working on the belly band that I wanted for this design. This is the largest strip that I was left with when I cut down the background for my first card, and I decided to combine it with the red and pink striped pattern paper. I cut two thin strips and I glued them to the sides of these larger belly bands to create some additional decoration. In my original sketch, this was going to run diagonally across my card front, but as I was playing around with the design, I decided to adhere it horizontally instead. As I was saying when I was discussing my sketches, these are just meant to be a guide for you to make the process a little bit faster, but if you figure out that they don't work as you go along and start creating, obviously nothing stops you from changing things around. I made sure that also this last focal point I was left with worked nicely with the design, and then I could go ahead, take out all my cards and start gluing the focal points to the card bases. As I said before, the reason why I waited until this point to adhere down all the images is that if I had figured out that the clusters that I had created in the first place didn't really work with my designs, I still had time at this point to switch things around. It turned out that things worked out pretty nicely, so I really didn't have to change much, but it was definitely good to have the option. For the sentiments on my cards, I used the XOXO stamp set by ModaScrap. I love that this has a lot of different greetings with different styles, and lots of them work pretty much for any occasions like XOXO and hugs. I stamped different greetings on my cards using VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I stamped the greetings directly on my card bases, and in a couple of cases I was stamping the sentiments in areas where I had layers of pattern paper, and this caused the sentiments not to stamp properly where the transition is. You can see an example here. Another one was the thank you card that I stamped earlier. I expected this to happen and this was not a problem at all, and actually I'm about to show you how I fixed it. All I did was to take a black fine liner and I used it to fill those little gaps where the two pattern paper layers meet. This is very quick and easy to do and will make your stamping look seamless. At this point you could call your cards done, but you know that I always like to add some finishing touches, so I decided to coat all the focal points with a glitter brush pen and also to add some details with some Nuvo drops. This will dry clear and will look like dewdrops, which I thought were the perfect accent for these fresh and summery cards. Once the Nuvo drops were completely dry, I went ahead and adhered everything to my card bases, and here is a look at the final result. I have to say that I really love the way these cards turned out. They really scream summer to me. I think the Crazy Summer paper collection is absolutely gorgeous, and I love the detail added by these fun sentiments and the Nuvo drops. Plus, as I said, these do not require any coloring and are super easy and super quick to make. Don't forget to let me know which one is your favorite. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope I inspired you to create with the ModaScrap Crazy Summer collection. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.